Before I share with you the edibles mnemonic, it's important that we remember how to distinguish the arrow plant from all of its lookalikes. This is easy. First thing we'll want to do is make an arrow. Vividly imagine yourself going to a tree, selecting a straight branch or twig. Cut this branch or twig at the proper size. Now you're starting to carve this branch or twig. The arrow shaft is now prepared. Coming directly from a tree, the shaft should be solid, not hollow. You do not want a hollow arrow shaft. If you have a straw, you do not have an arrow. It's important to make this distinction because poison hemlock has hollow stems. First thing you do, now that your arrow shaft is prepared, is apply a tip. You can carve a tip or a point onto the top of your arrow, or you can, if you want to remember flat-topped flower clusters being associated with the arrow plant, imagine yourself applying an Indian arrowhead, which are flat, which then can be associated with the flat-topped flower clusters, because the top of your arrow represents the top of the arrow plant, which are the flowers. Now that the tip is finished, one of the first things we do is apply our finger to the tip to see how pointed it is, see how sharp it is. When you do this, remember the word tip. You're touching the tip, seeing how sharp the tip is. Tip is then associated with the word tipsy, and tipsy is then associated with the word drunk. And when you think of someone who was drunk, what do? They stagger. So as you remember learning in part 1 that the stems of single flowers or flower clusters, they stagger off the stem. The bottom of your arrow is next. Going ahead now and imagine yourself carving in a notch on the bottom of your arrow shaft. This notch is designed to be placed on the bowstring, which represents the roots. For the bottom of your arrow represents the bottom of the plant. And the notch allows you to adjust or crawl that arrow up and down this bowstring until it feels comfortable. And the string represents the rhizomatous root system, which you learned about in part 1. Now that only 2 parts of your arrow are finished, you now have the tools or the ability to be able to distinguish arrow plant from all of its lookalikes by remembering one sentence. That sentence is, its flowers stagger, and its roots crawl. That's it. None of Yarrow's lookalikes do both. They might do one or the other, but none of Yarrow's lookalikes do both, stagger and crawl. Now, for backup, we can apply some additional distinguishing characteristics to our arrow. Because our arrow is not finished yet, what do we need next? You probably guessed it. We need fletchings, or what's typically seen or imagined as being feathers along the bottom portion of the arrow to assist it in flight. These arrows, or I should say these feathers, can be acquired right from the plant itself. Little feather is actually one of the many common names of common yarrow, which we've nicknamed Yarrow. Little feather relates to the leaves' feather-like appearance. So imagine yourself taking some of these leaves and applying them to the bottom portion of your arrow. Now your arrow is complete. Examine it closely from the top to the bottom. The very top is sharp. You've got a tip. Whether you have a flat-tipped Indian head, arrowhead, or you have just simply carved your stick into a point. Either way, the tip is sharp. Tip, tipsy, drunk, staggers, flower stagger. Going further down, you've got the arrow shaft, which is solid. It's not hollow. If you have a straw, you do not have an arrow. Going down a little further, you have the fletchings, which are represented by the leaves, which are feather-like, that is associated with the arrow plant. Then as you go further down to the bottom, which represents the bottom of the arrow plant, which are the roots, you see how the roots crawl, or the arrow via the notch is able to crawl along this root system, being able to pop up anywhere along this string. There are two options I would like to give you now. You can take none of them, one of them, or both of them. The first option is designed to help you remember the colors, or the typical or primary colors of arrow, which could allow you to identify what possibly could be arrow from a distance while in the field. The key word is popcorn, because a typical flower cluster of arrow will appear to be white or have some type of a yellowish shade to it, as popcorn does. So now that your arrow is finished, imagine yourself stringing popcorn with it. Get very elaborate, get very vivid. Make this real in your mind. Perhaps you've made a necklace for yourself or for someone else, or you've done something else with this popcorn stringing. And that is all of option 1, being white or yellow. Option 2 helps you to remember 2 additional shades which arrow can appear in, or arrow flowers can appear in, and that is the colors of pink or purple. After you've strung your popcorn, imagine yourself actually during that process, you've injured yourself somehow. You're going to have to be creative and think of somehow you're going to injure yourself by stringing popcorn with your arrow. The result? Unfortunately, you look at yourself in the mirror and you've got a black eye. Around your poor eye is a purple circle. You open your eye, try to look inside to see if there's damage inside. It's nothing serious. It's just very pink inside your eyes. You've got like pink eye. So the purple circle around your eye, I've had black eyes in the past, and you see more purple than black, at least in my cases. Anyway, the purple reminds you of the purple shades that the arrow flowers can appear in. And when you try to open your eye and look in the mirror to see the inside of your eyeball there, it's all pink. You've got like pink eye, and that should then remind you of the shades of pink which the arrow plant can appear in. Now, our arrow is finished. You have committed to remembering, along with your arrow, option 1, or 2, or both, or none. Now I will share the edible mnemonic, since you understand the arrow portion. Here we go. You're stranded in the wilderness and spot a huge bird perched on top of the arrow plant, and it's eating the plant's flowers. Your arrow is used to shoot the bird for survival food. If you cannot imagine that, okay, at least imagine taking aim at the huge bird on top of the arrow plant. You shoot but miss the huge bird. As the bird flies away, you watch a few of its feathers float to the ground.